Creeks Restoration and Water Quality Improvement Citizens Advisory Committee meeting, last one of the year. Could you take roll, please?
Mr. Bullock?
Here.
Mr. Moldaver?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Ms. French? Ms. Lomas?
Here.
Ms. Weber?
Here.
Mr. McIntosh?
Here.
Ms. Self? Mr. Jordan? Mr. Casepier?
Here.
There is a copy of the minutes from our last meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review it? Are there any questions on the minutes from last time? Can I get a motion to approve?
Move to accept the draft minutes as submitted.
Anyone second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Are there any adjustments to the agenda, Cameron?
No, Mr. Chair, but I do have one announcement. Yesterday at the City Council meeting, the Council made appointments for this committee, and we have 4 incumbents who were all up for reappointment, and that's Mr. McIntosh, Chair Bullock, Mr. Moldaver, and Ms. Weber, and all 4 were appointed unanimously by acclamation. So congratulations and thank you.
Thank you very much. Well done. Next item is public comment. Are there any members of the public who'd like to talk? Nope. Okay, moving on. Staff communications?
No.
So straight down to the business then. Cameron?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Our first item is, since this is our last meeting of 2011 calendar year, is to review and approve the proposed meeting calendar for 2012, and these are our regular meetings for this committee. Proposed calendar went out with your packet, and as usual, we're looking at the 3rd Wednesday of every month at 5:30. As you'll see, some of the meetings are scheduled to be in this meeting room, David Gebhard meeting room, some of them for the council chambers at City Hall, and that just is because of conflicts with the meeting room space during that day. 2 of the meetings are proposed for the 2nd Wednesdays, and that's in November and December because of holiday conflicts. So committee can feel free to have any discussion about these. If we need to change any of these meetings, we can do that. Otherwise, we can go forward and adopt this as our regular meeting schedule.
Mr. Chair, move to accept the proposed 2012 committee meeting schedule.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Thank you. Passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving on to business item number B is the Mason Street Bridge Replacement Project, and we have as the committee remembers, we had a presentation regarding a proposed Mason Street Bridge Replacement Project at our October meeting, a presentation by Public Works engineering staff, and at that meeting the committee appointed a liaison and a backup liaison to go express the committee's comments about the project to the Historic Landmarks Commission as they're going through design review. The liaison that was appointed is Leanne French, and she is not here tonight. The backup liaison is Lee Moldaver, and Leanne attended the first Historic Landmarks Commission meeting on November 9th for the project and provided testimony to the commission regarding the committee's concerns about the preservation of a large sycamore tree right next to the bridge, concerns about the width of Kimberly Street, and questions about whether it could be narrowed by making it a one-way street, so that the roadway and the sidewalk would be pulled further off the top of the bank of the creek, and to narrow the Mason Street Bridge as much as possible for resource protection, and also two additional comments, one regarding the bridge railing and the size of the openings in the railing to try to prevent, to make the spaces small enough so that cans and bottles and other litter doesn't fit through them and get into the creek. I'm sorry, two more. One regarding fencing being installed during construction to keep people from getting under the bridge, and that the habitat areas on both the upstream and downstream sides of the bridge be designed to have sloped banks to allow for vegetation and wildlife habitat. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Moldaver to report back to the committee or his experience. He was at the HLC on December 7th to represent the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members, members of the public. Yeah, we actually met in this very room, and it was Pearl Harbor Day. And one of the city's most talented engineers, John Owasiak, was sitting up at the table presenting, and I think I was sitting right behind where he was now. And I think our comments were pretty similar to the comments that Leanne had made and that we had agreed upon in our meeting at the Casa de las Palmas in October, and that was to find innovative ways to protect the large sycamore tree, if at all possible, to get sloping banks rather than sheer vertical flood control walls wherever possible, and to see whether Kimberly Road could be made a one-way street and narrower, and also that the Mason Street Bridge, we recognize it has to be replaced. It's worn. We recognize that the length of the span is part of the existing engineering. In our request to the Historic Landmarks Commission was for them to work with Public Works to see if that replaced bridge could be narrower, which in our mind would give more protection to the creek, to the steelhead. It would give less opportunity for socially disruptive behavior by people that currently goes on under the bridge span. And I think that the Historic Landmarks Commission was fairly receptive to that. We had a very nice conversation from the three main points that Ms. French had convinced HLC to support, which was saving the sycamore tree, narrow bridge on Mason, sloping creek banks wherever possible, and a narrower one-way street on Kimberly. They'd asked for more information from the project proponent in the November meeting, and there was an extensive written and oral discussion that I think John may be able to add to about why trying to preserve the tree would be very challenging and very expensive under a lot of different scenarios, but not all. And because that was the focus of their staff report, they weren't able in writing to spend a lot of time talking about the sloping banks or one-way narrower on Kimberly. But at the conversation in the December meeting, the strong, I think it was unanimous majority of the HLC voted to reconfirm their direction from November with Leanne French that they wanted to save the large sycamore tree, they wanted a narrower bridge, they wanted sloping banks wherever possible, and they really would like to see a narrower one-way Kimberly. And so that was our presentation. Eddie Harris from Urban Creeks Council was there, and he added to that that if the big sycamore had to go, he would like to see some of the mitigation of new sycamore plantings be on both sides of the creek, because it's important for the fish and the wildlife to have some shade on both banks for them to thrive. And that was very positive. I think another very positive outcome was that John, that I think we're going to hear from briefly, and City Engineer Pat Kelly, we had a very nice conversation after the meeting about trying to work together and look at a wider range of options and try to do some further innovation if it's possible. The HLC basically directed the project applicant, which is the City Public Works Department, to come back at their January meeting with a clear response to their requests. And that's my main recollection from December 7th. Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Chair, I had a meeting and request from the city engineer, Pat Kelly, to, I want to make sure I get this right, come to the committee and ask the committee for specific design recommendations as the project goes forward. And so I was going to come around. I've got some plans because I know you're all familiar with the site. We've been out there on a site visit, and I've got some plans to look at so that you can kind of orient yourself to some of the different issues. John Owaziak is a principal engineer with the Public Works Engineering Division, and he's here tonight to discuss this, and he'd like to say a few words. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. John Owaziak, principal civil engineer. And yes, I'd like to continue to work with the committee and to continue to work with the HLC with regards to these issues, because they're very important and significant issues. And so I think that everyone on my team acknowledges that we have significant challenges with these issues. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail about the site constraints and the design criteria, but there are some, Mr. Moldaver hit on the key elements of the project that we need to work on, to continue to work on. What we went to the HLC on December 9th was the request for them to acknowledge that the western alignment of the bridge, the western abutment alignment and the creek wall alignment is critical to the project. Some acknowledgement of that. And I believe that we've achieved that with regards to having further discussions with creek staff and with addressing it with the HLC. The western alignment of the abutment and the western creek wall alignment drives the geometry of the bridge. Sure, if we could get, sure. Come around and look at plans. These are the plans that were shown at your Creeks Committee. I brought them back just if you would like to refresh your memory. If that, John, get a seat up here. We can just sit up here. Thank you. Do you mind sharing? Thank you. This is the set that was at the Creeks Committee meeting, and so we have the existing site constraints. And so here's the tree, the proposed bridge, and Kimberly Avenue. And so if we could advance to this plan that showed, actually I'm not sure that we submitted that one for that Creeks Committee. We actually this version of it, but either one shows the features that we're referring to. So this western bridge abutment alignment, which is the western bank of Mission Creek, is the anchor, so to speak, of this project with regards to geometry. It drives how the rest fits into the scheme of things. And so with this alignment, it's an important starting point. So from that starting point is the required 55 feet of span of bridge that's required for the 55-foot wide channel. And so one of our attempts is to have a balanced project, trying to balance the most important elements of the project. And I believe that I hope that we have some consensus that this habitat expansion zone, we want to maximize that area for the benefit of the intended purposes, which is habitat and animals that can utilize that as the point of exit from Mission Creek and onto land. And so we value this area. I think it's very important to maximize that. This western alignment gives us the best ability to maximize that. So we're also exploring this width of Mason issue and trying our best to meet all the design criteria and the design requirements so as to best minimize this width. And that's what we're currently working on. It's a challenge because there are some competing requirements regarding that and competing city policy or practices to deal with. And so sidewalk width are being evaluated, site turning radiuses and site turning criteria is being evaluated. We find that we are able to reduce the sidewalk on both sides, but we're exploring as to what amount is that reduction. So that we're currently working on. I have some preliminary information, but I'd rather make sure that I have some solid information before telling you to what degree that we can minimize this width, but we are working on that. The alignment of Kimberly, it's clear that Kimberly is needing to move from its current alignment over to accommodate the 55-foot wide channel. So we also are trying to minimize how far Kimberly moves over, because there is a significant acquisition on the 16 West Mason property. This drawing here shows the property line at the corner, and this represents the amount of take or acquisition that would be necessary to realign Kimberly. So it's important to us to minimize this width of Kimberly. Many people are talking about one way as the driving force to minimize the width. From an engineering and from a transportation perspective, we are looking at the minimum width that we can support, regardless if it's one or two way, because it can be one or two way depending on a council or a future determination. So we're looking at the issues of what is the best interest of the city, of what the minimum width of this can be. So I believe that I hope that we're saying the same thing, is that we were looking at minimizing this width. But there are operational and there are safety and there are geometric requirements for this intersection that must be adhered to for us to be able to construct it with federally funded dollars. And again, that's an important aspect because there's federal criteria and there's federal regulations that must be followed so that we can get this grant funding in the excess of $10 million. So all these pieces of the puzzle have to come together and get the approvals necessary to do that. And along the way, we would like to address and at least be extremely responsive to each and every one of the issues that you have laid before us. So I just wanted to get that on the table, that we are going back to the drawing board. We're going back to looking at the extent that it is feasible to save the tree. Please know that we have made a lot of effort to do investigations in Arborist report and analysis in our attempts to preserve the tree. We just don't know if it's going to live with the construction that is going to be required to be done. So we're going to try to do what's reasonable and feasible with regards to the tree. The narrowing of the bridge may help with that. We are fixed on the alignment, but pulling that abutment to the north slightly, we'll see if that can help preserve the tree. In the Arborist report, it recognizes that the construction of this project alone will be a significant impact to the tree. So we'll revisit that with the arborist with our revised and updated designs. That we can do. Now, if the tree doesn't make it, if we make even every attempt to save the tree and it doesn't make it, then one of the things that we are initiating even at this time is the recommendation of the Creeks Committee, which was to explore the propagation of the tree sooner than later. Because my understanding is that this largest trunk that is 30-inch in diameter, that leans 45-degree over Mission Creek, it may not make it due to the construction of the project. And so if there's portions of the tree that could be utilized for propagation in the vicinity, the HLC said if the tree did have to go or ended up going, that we would want to have another replacement tree immediately in this vicinity and also throughout the project. And you can see that there are a number of sycamore trees proposed in the area, and we would propagate the tree to the best that we could, and we would initiate that sooner than later. We're investigating that right now. Hopefully that addresses the main. The sloping, please. The section that we did bring to the committee meeting that was discussed, I believe that we have we would like to incorporate what the Creek staff would recommend, and I believe that Creek staff has input was involved with the creation of this section, And if there's some improvements to this, we'd be certainly looking at embellishing on this as appropriate. But this is the section that was at the Creeks Committee, and that's the section that we have for this portion. So this expanded habitat area that we talked about being important, I believe that we'll, if you could let me know if this does meet with your approval or with your direction of that's what would be recognized there. With regards to this area is different than this area. This area here, we have the ability and the width to have this type of an arrangement. With this area, we have a 54-inch storm drain that's going right through this area, and that drives the need for additional height. And we can't terrace or slope this to the, and we also have existing features and new design features where we have the ability to have slope, but not to the extent of this type of sloping. So what we would like to do is maximize the sloping on this area, but it won't function as the way for animals to get out of the creek like this does. But at least in the project, we have that important component we heard as being an important component to the project. But we would do, we're still doing investigation as what is the maximum amount of sloping that we can recommend in this portion. And I believe that surmises the concerns that I had.
Yeah, I have several questions on the design of the banks. This is what, 1.5 to 2?
I think it was a 2 to 1. Explained as a 2 to 1, I believe.
That seems a lot steeper than a 2 to 1.
Maybe George can help us with that. That's what we heard was a 2 to 1?
Yes, the 2 to 1 is what David Black said.
Yeah.
Okay, the 2 to 1 is probably the steepest that would be allowed through the permit process through state and federal agency. You probably will not be able to do it any steeper because of bank instability. 2 to 1 will support some vegetation as long as it's not compacted down to 20 or 90%. If it's like 85, you will get the roots to go through, but anything higher than 85, you'll have a hard time establishing vegetation. So if that just seemed really steep to me on the drawing.
Mm-hmm.
Everything looked all right, but I just wanted to make sure on that slope. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Natasha. I think when we were at our October meeting, we had quite a bit of discussion about that. It is a steep slope. The trade-off is two different types of habitat. You've got the emergent wetland and you've got the upland, and there's not much of either of them in Lower Mission Creek, downstream of the freeway. So this was an attempt to kind of strike a balance so that you have a little bit of both, and we recognize that it's challenging to get plants to establish on that steep of slope, but that provides us kind of a balance of two different habitat types, as small as they are.
You can also do planting pockets to make little areas where you could plant some larger rooted plants.
Okay. Thanks, John, for the presentation. I wanted to kind of try to get us focused. Clearly, there's a lot of constraints around this area. There always is when you're working with a heavily urbanized creek. It's right, downtown. We've got roads and buildings all around the creek in this area, and then the bridge itself. And so there are quite a few constraints. Again, Pat Kelly, the city engineer, asked the committee to try to focus its comments into specific design suggestions to be considered. And so, in order to kind of further direct that, the Public Works Department is going through a design review process with HLC, as I mentioned, and HLC has now asked Public Works to come back with a number of different things. A lot of them overlap with what this committee has requested as well. And so I just wanted to kind of name a few of the things. I just rewatched the motion today on television so that I would have all that down, and I want I'd like the committee to keep these things in mind as you're trying to make suggestions, so that we're not making suggestions that are inconsistent with the HLC's request. The first request was that slope banks are essential to the project and should be included. They requested that the sidewalk widths be reduced. They requested to show plans with Kimberly Street as a one-way street, to show a plan with a minimized bridge width. And again, I want to be clear, when I'm talking about the width of the bridge, it's the side-to-side width of the bridge, not the length of the bridge or the span of the bridge over the creek. That is fixed because of the flood control project and the design capacity of that project. So when we're talking about the width, it's side-to-side width of the bridge. Specifically, the HLC asked to shrink the width of the bridge so as to protect the sycamore tree. The HLC has asked to show new sycamores on the western bank of the creek. They asked that appropriately significant-sized trees be used. I think there was some discussion around using, say, 24-inch box trees or even larger, although that was not recommended by the landscape architect on the project. They asked for a further effort towards balance with regard to the neighborhood compatibility. They felt that the bridge was too large for the neighborhood. If the sycamore is proposed to be removed, that mitigating measures be shown on the plans, and also to return with studies of materials for the railings and bridge abutments and so forth. So I think there's a lot of overlap with what this committee's discussion and comments were with regard to the bridge. So what we see here was what I think the committee saw when this was presented to the committee. This plan shows what was presented to the HLC, I think, at both of the HLC meetings. And what I did was try to make an aerial photo of the area so that kind of to remind everyone what it actually looks like now. This is a 2008 photo, and in order to try to move things along, I want to note that there's several different areas. As John mentioned, there's a habitat expansion area downstream here. There's going to be some work because this bank is going to be moved back, so there's going to be some work upstream here. But I wanted to start by focusing on one that I think hits a lot of the issues that were brought up, particularly with regard to the sycamore tree. As John said, there's an interest in maximizing the space in the habitat expansion area. The flood control project is expanding the creek, so we're losing some of the bank area in the creek, and this is one and maybe the only opportunity on the downstream side of the freeway to expand habitat. So looking at the current configuration of the area, this is Mason Street here, and this is Kimberly. This is not to scale. It's just to get a sense. It's very conceptual. But this blue line here represents approximately where the new top of bank will be on Mission Creek. So it's moving from here essentially out to here and all the way down. This green area represents this habitat expansion zone as it's shown on the plans. And what you can see is the current style of the Mason Street Bridge. It's a narrow bridge with very narrow sidewalks. I think the sidewalks there are currently 4 feet, 3.5 feet, very narrow. And the road kind of squeezes in here over the bridge and then widens back out on both sides. And it's a little hard to see this because it's actually covered by the tree canopy there. But you can really see it. You can really see it better in this photo, and it kind of cuts in there and then cuts back over, and so it sort of juts in. And one of the possibilities here may be, and it may not be feasible. It's something that was just discussed this week. Is to move the upstream side of the bridge up so that you've got essentially a connection along the sidewalk on the upstream side, and the bridge would move over this direction some. And in doing that, you can widen the sidewalks and bring those up to the standard and meet the sidewalk widths that are on both sides for the feeder sidewalks. But you could retain this I don't know what to call it, jutting in deflection that the current bridge has. And the purpose for doing that, and this goes right to the HLC's request to come back with a design that narrows the bridge and preserves the tree in place. And in order to do that, the existing abutment for the current bridge runs right here along this wall of the creek. And that abutment is seismically deficient and needs to be replaced. So rather than move the abutment out into the creek to protect the sycamore tree, which would really be a major realignment to the creek, would eat up this habitat expansion area. One thing the committee could consider is putting the new abutment just directly behind the existing one, and so you could get you could build a new abutment that has the structural strength that's required. You wouldn't need to even remove the old one. That could be left in place and remain as the flood wall, and then place a new bridge on top of it. And in doing that and retaining this deflection, you don't end up getting any closer to the tree than the current bridge is. It also allows, again, for 6 foot wide sidewalks, which is I think in the pedestrian master plan for the city. This design actually gives you a wider street width than either of the feeder streets have. So there's actually some room to widen the sidewalks further if necessary, to just bring the street width to the same width as the other two sides of Mason Street. Another benefit, and I made drawings of the sidewalk coming in here, or going all the way to the end here. And the benefits of extending this deflection further is that you add to your habitat expansion area. So this is the widest section of the habitat expansion area. Gets a little bit wider up here. This would be an almost 25% increase in the habitat expansion area. So this could be, again, we don't know whether it's technically feasible. This could be a design that accommodates what the committee was looking for, as well as the HLC request. I think from an engineering perspective, what I heard was there's a significant challenge with this design, and that is a later project is going to be replacing the walls that were built on on the western side of Mission Creek down here. And so as the phase 1 of that project is complete, we have a concrete wall, vertical wall that comes up to about here on the map, not on this map, but on this photo. And so that wall is going to be extended up. So there's some question as to how far you could get a footing for that wall built up before you hit tree roots, and can't get the footing farther, and whether you could put your footing as far as you could go before you hit the tree, and then extend the wall close enough to the tree, and whether there would be sufficient flood capacity because the tree is at a 45-degree angle across the creek. And so there's a lot of questions to look at as to whether something like that would be possible. So I'd like to try to kind of address these different areas just one at a time, so that we can so I'd like to talk about that bridge width design and the tree kind of together, and then we can talk about the habitat expansion zone downstream, the upstream area, and I'll see if I have any other issues that we talked about in our meeting. But does anyone have any questions or comments about that?
But it has nothing to do with the creek. It's more just looking at your map. I'm sorry. So it's more just looking at your map, Cameron. So as you just explained that as an option, the street then from State all the way over the bridge to Chapala, no, to Chapala, would have a permanent bigger jog in it to the right than it does now, right?
It depends which side you look at. If you see where the backs of these parked cars go, and you line that up, it's actually, it comes in further this direction than the current
Right.
setup, but it doesn't come into traffic as much as the parked vehicles do. On this side it does. But one, again, this is really conceptual. So one way to look at that, we discussed this for a minute before the meeting, is the sidewalk could still move this direction a little bit. This is a potential issue.
So it's a tough job. In fact, I think I got a discussion at the environmental hearing on the width where the cars are parked driving down that street and traffic implications of the jog then. And I think you're moving in the right direction at widening it both back up, as long as it doesn't further worsen the jog, I guess.
Well, just looking at this, it looks like it creates a bigger jog if you're driving towards State Street,
Right.
and but more protection for these parked vehicles. You really kind of do want to pull these. It looks like from a traffic standpoint, you do want to pull the traffic off of.
And then I had one other question on the comment was made on the purpose of one of the purposes of the buffer areas with the landscaping was shading and habitat protection. Is there no opportunity to do that on the west side of the creek too, or are you just immediately onto private property?
Or on private property.
It is private property, and I think what was represented at the last meeting was that there have been discussions with the private property owner to put some trees up there. There was I think specific direction from the HLC to come back with some trees up on the western bank as well.
John, did you want to comment about?
Yeah, please, Mr. Chair, thank you. So, just so that you know that Public Works staff will investigate whatever the committee would like to make recommendations on. And so, one of the comments I have is that from State Street to near Kimberly is a component of the La Entrada project. The State Street between the railroad tracks and the State Street Bridge at Mission Creek. And so we are currently going to be reviewing, or soon we'll be reviewing, improved public improvement plans for State Street and for this component of Mason Street. In the new plans, we anticipate that this won't be perpendicular parking, that this will be parallel parking, and this road width, which is currently 38 or 39 feet, would be 36 feet. So we do have an opportunity here to marry two components of the two different projects into something that we can shoot towards benefiting the city. So these are timely comments right now, so we still have to provide that developer some direction on these design components, and we have some ideas. And so any of these ideas or requests or investigations, I'd like to hear from you on what you would like us to explore.
Mr. Jordan, one thing I notice here is by moving the roadway this way, you actually take this jog out of this side completely.
I'm curious how, what ideas you have to physically preserve the sycamore tree.
Mr. Chair, the existing bridge abutment is about 12 to 13 feet from the tree currently, so it will require removal or possibly protect in place. But what's of concern is the distance for the new abutment and any wall that's required for flood protection adjacent to the tree. So we are investigating that. So we're going to explore what is feasible or what can possibly be done to again, to the maximum extent feasible, protect the tree. So we're investigating that. I don't have any definitive solution, but we're talking with our design engineers on that.
So much emphasis has been put in this abutment area, but how about physically right under the tree? Would we have to intrude or deflect into the creek to protect the tree?
Mr. Chair, we've looked at deflecting into the tree, but that compromises the conveyance of Mission Creek, the future Mission Creek flow. So we are not in support of the deflection. If we deflect out here on this side, then we have to have an equal deflection on this side, which again cuts into the habitat expansion zone. So we've evaluated that. The arborist report indicated that we need to have, in order, in his estimation, his recommendation was to have 12 feet of clear to the bridge abutment and 8 feet of clear to the creek wall. So moving at least 12 feet for construction purposes, I'm estimating 10 to 12 feet. When you say 8 feet clear, you need room to construct. And so a 12-foot move in this direction causes significant issues, the triggering of significant issues, one being the shrinking of the important habitat expansion zone. We're already at slopes that are difficult or challenging at this current width. I think we compromise that section significantly if we move something like 12 feet. It also ends up moving Kimberly onto easterly onto the adjacent property, and we all know that there's a proposed development on this, and that we've been told is a significant issue as well.
So I think, Mr. Casper, this type of abutment supporting the bridge would be built here. This gives you that 13-foot clearance from the tree. So you can build this new abutment without affecting the tree. What you would then be doing is coming up from this direction and building your flood wall. And what you would do in that type of design, because the tree comes out at a 45-degree angle like this, what you would do is you would have one wall that comes up to the upstream side of the tree and one wall that comes up to the downstream side of the tree, and the tree fills in the space.
And is that feasible?
Honestly, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not an arborist, and we would find out.
No, but from a engineering stream construction,
Well,
if we just leave a gap, have those walls come up, and then there would be a gap of 8, 10, 12, 14.
I don't believe that's going to work from the flood control perspective, but so is there an alternative to that? We would see what the alternatives are. I don't know what they are. I honestly don't know, because we're just now entertaining the bridge abutment moving in this direction, and so we're trying to understand what the impacts to the tree may be under that design criteria. So we'll explore it. Initially, it didn't look favorable, but we're all in support of evaluating whether it is a viable option to save the tree, because our first efforts are to save the tree. But if when Cameron mentioned the impact of the tree, we're told that any construction around the tree will impact the tree, and so there's no assurance the tree will live even if we stayed 12 feet away from the abutment or 8 feet from the wall. And as a matter of fact, the arborist report does indicate that there may be some, because of the topping of the tree. If you looked at it from the street, there's significant topping of 2 of the 5 trunks of the tree, and the tree is compromised and will be impacted by the construction project. So we're planning, we're going to see if it's viable to save it, and we'll explore all the possibilities to do what we can do within reason.
Can sycamore trees be moved?
Not that one.
Not that one. Yeah, they can, but not this one has 5 trunks, huge root ball. We've asked the arborist if it's possible, and the response from him was no.
But the existing wall that's there now, 40 years ago, 60 years ago.
The existing wall is on either side of the tree, and the tree acts as the wall.
Constructed that wall 40 or 60 years ago, right up to the edge of the tree, and the trees thrived. It's
Mr. Chair, that's true, and so, but we do need to go through all the review process to get a new project approved. And so for the bridge component of this project, then we will evaluate where the tree lies with regards to what has to be done for the bridge. And I believe what Cameron was saying was that following our bridge construction project, there'll be the Lower Mission Creek widening project that will follow. And that will be the time when they'll need to evaluate what, if anything, can be done to the tree for that component of the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project.
In other words, what you're saying is, it is working for flood control now to have a design that has a wall coming to the tree from the upstream side and then starting on the other side of the tree. I don't know if it was actually constructed that way. It almost, given the age of that construction and the tree, it looks like the tree probably popped it's like railroad ties is what the wall is constructed of now, and it looks like the tree has grown and popped those out and taken their place. But yes, it seems like that has been in place for a long time.
So actually, I didn't realize this. You're only concerned with the bridge. And the actual wall construction is a whole nother process.
Mr. Chair, we're evaluating how far our bridge project will go with relation to the tree. We initially believed that we would be installing a temporary wall beyond the tree if the tree was needing to go. But we're now reevaluating to what extent the bridge project will end. It's possible it ends before the tree if we believe it's a viable option to save the tree. Sorry.
I know that was an important issue for you. I'd like to try to move through the other issue areas quickly, if we can, that we discussed in our meeting. And I want to start with this downstream what's being called the habitat expansion zone. This is a cross section of that area. We've reviewed it before. We already kind of talked about the slope and the steepness of the slope. As I mentioned, this design increases the area by over 20%, approximately 25%. Which would be much needed in that area. But what I think would interest the HLC and certainly interests the Public Works Engineering folks is the committee's understanding of this type of design, and I mean, this is conceptual and conceptual support for this type of design, so that we can kind of give a thumbs up to this area and what's being proposed down there. And I think as part of that, one of the things Mr. Kelly, the city engineer, was interested in is an acknowledgement from the committee that, yes, this width for the flood control project does have to be 55 feet wide. So we don't really have an option of, moving out into the channel on this side to constrain the project this way, and that would compromise the ability to install or implement this portion of the project. And so does that cover it? Okay. Does anyone have any questions or comments about that?
Will ingress and egress be limited so that the public just can't walk down into the creek?
Yes, we'll have a fenced component on this side of the project. So there will be a vertical element and a fence on this side to keep the ingress-egress for
what about up here?
I believe that here as well. I believe the perimeter of that, so that it would prevent ingress-egress from people.
And I would just add a couple of things from our observations down in this area. This is as designed as an elevation that, as you can see, that water drawn on here is an emergent wetland area. It's wetted most of the time, except when the lagoon is breached. And at a 2-to-1 slope, this isn't a very comfortable place to stand or hang out without kind of tumbling down into the water. So, there's public safety aspects to that, as well as people getting in down under the bridge and so forth.
How is this slope here going to merge into the bridge abutment underneath the bridge? So I assume that's going to be vertical, correct? Or is it also going to be at a 2-to-1 slope underneath the bridge?
Mr. Chair, we haven't worked out that specific detail yet, but there will be a transition from that slope to the vertical component here. And similarly, this slope will flatten out at this end. So this section generally, I believe, is through the meat of the area. So that's why we're saying that once we make this area, if we had to make this area smaller due to other design constraints or parameters, it really becomes less effective significantly.
Okay, next I wanted to just talk about the upstream area here. And in keeping with the committee's comments from before and the HLC's suggestion for the slope banks, there are a couple issues here. One, the committee may want to continue to recommend sloping these banks down to the water level or down to the bed as much as possible. John mentioned a storm drain pipe. It's a 54-inch pipe, which is a very large storm drain pipe that currently runs down this way and enters the creek downstream of the bridge. One of the concepts that we talked about yesterday that hasn't been explored, but is a possibility, is to, instead of have that storm drain run all the way along here, direct it out to the creek upstream of the bridge in this area, which then you would be able to slope these banks down because you wouldn't have to go up over the pipe and down. So that may be so relocating the outfall of that storm drain pipe may be a way to achieve the slope banks in this area.
Sorry, Cameron, do you mind if I just expand on that a little bit? Again, it wouldn't be configuring to that type of a slope bank. It would be a different slope bank. I believe that we still will have a vertical wall element in here. We'll find out to what extent. But because there will be some existing storm drain pipe remaining, we'll need to ensure that there's cover over the pipe. We're not going to have a pipe just exposed. We would it would likely be a buried pipe, but then we have the bridge abutment on this side that we have to transition to. So what we envisioned was more like a bowl, so that the height of any wall that's necessary, that it be minimized. And so the sloping we're talking about is sloping from the back of sidewalk to the creek generally, and sloping in both directions from this point and this point downward.
So the committee might want to consider suggesting relocating that outfall and then removing the abandoned pipe so that you can backfill and then achieve the slope. The committee's talked about sidewalk width up here because we've got a sidewalk right at the top of a steep bank down into the creek, and so the committee could follow the HLC's suggestion of narrowing the sidewalks as much as possible. We do have a sidewalk on this side of the street. It may be possible to eliminate the sidewalk over here and set up a pedestrian use that does something like this. And that would be an unusual design because you'd be setting up a crosswalk in the middle of the street, but this is a street without very much traffic. And so I don't know if that's a possibility or not. I don't know if that's something the committee's interested in. But perhaps this proposed sidewalk, I think, is 6 feet. I think the city's guidelines suggest a 6-foot sidewalk minimum, but I think the city ordinance is a 5-foot sidewalk minimum. And then one other component that I wanted to let the committee know about, because I just learned about that, is in the EIR for the project, it shows this area. It shows this area as an additional habitat expansion zone, and I think as part of this bridge project, they're not looking at including this as part of the construction at this time, and so. I don't know if the committee wants to recommend keeping that in as part of the project. It was part of the project and it's in these plans, but it's I think in the future it's proposed that would come out of the project.
Mr. Chair, if I could just elaborate on that. This area here, this is the future 55-foot wall that would be constructed when the Lower Mission Creek project gets widened upstream of the bridge. And so this is temporary. So we're having the challenge of this triangular component being habitat expansion zone that expands further, similar to this one, where we have the opportunity to do another sloped area. So we envision this area here in the permanent state to be similar to that version, similar to this version in style. And we wouldn't be able to accomplish that temporarily because we can't slope this down temporarily while we have this component existing. And so what our recommendation, our staff recommendation, was to not include this component in the project at this time, and that we would stop it generally at the gabion wall, existing gabion wall, and that this would be permanent, but it wouldn't be the sloped habitat expansion zone that would come later in the project. So there are some design issues associated with this future permanent triangular component and this temporary area that it currently exists.
And another component of this, one of the things based on some early comments, is the design for this sidewalk used to have the sidewalk pushed closer to the creek, and there was a parkway strip like this that ran along here, and then the sidewalk was right up next to the creek. Public Works has essentially eliminated that parkway strip, moved the sidewalk this way to get further away from the creek. You have, this essentially becomes your parkway strip, the top of the creek bank there and the riparian vegetation there. That may be something that we would want to continue up here, and rather than have this jog into the in towards the creek here, because as John just mentioned, this looks wide on these plans, but this is proposed to be eliminated to this line in the future as part of the flood control project. So we may want to continue this line along here and do the plantings on this side of the sidewalk. Okay. Anything else on that? I think we're going to move that on. Okay. We've talked about that one. Talked about that one. Okay. I think we've hit all of the points that we discussed. One last thing I wanted to bring up about the width of this bridge as compared to the width of this proposed bridge. The way this is proposed, you have 12-foot sidewalks. Actually, I think 10-foot sidewalks with a 2-foot thick wall railing on each side. That increases the width. I mean, the sidewalks here are 10 feet, but 4 feet is taken up with parkway. On the bridge, you wouldn't have the parkway. It would just be 10 feet of concrete. This also envisions that there would be parking, car parking on both sides of the bridge. So, if we move to this type of design, although this proposed area is wider than the existing roadway on either side, it may not allow for parking on the bridge. And so, to the extent that's driving the width of the project, then that may be another challenge. And so one idea is, clearly there's no parking on the bridge now. It barely fits 2 cars going across at the same time. But that may be a recommendation from the committee, is just to eliminate the parking on the bridge as a means of narrowing the bridge. Because I think when you're designing parking, street parking, you not only have to design for the width of the car, but you have to consider that the doors are going to be opening, vehicles are going to be going past, doors will be opening onto the sidewalks as well, and there will be pedestrian traffic there.
One comment, Cameron, on this drawing that you made here with the abutment being moved towards Chapala Street, how will that affect the homeowner there or the property owner?
Well, I was just going to say, I think the current proposal is for the city to purchase this property during construction, protect in place. This is, I believe it's either a historic property or eligible, but anyway, it's going to be purchased, protected in place. This abutment is going to have to be built wide enough to support the bridge in either design. So I don't think that this kind of design would be an issue with regard to this property.
Mr. Chair, the challenge in moving the abutment further to the west than the existing abutment will be how do we how do we tie back into the alignment of the wall, the creek wall? So with moving the bridge abutment to the west, we have to come back and tie into the wall. So we're going to be talking to our design engineers, bridge design engineers, over that aspect of it. I'm not sure the costs and the issues associated with moving that existing bridge abutment to the west. I know that was discussed in some preliminary design meetings that we had with them, and there were issues. I just don't remember them. It's too far back. But we'll evaluate what the feasibility issues are of that and the cost issues associated, and we'll see what those key elements are, and we'll evaluate that.
But by doing that, you're also not working directly in the creek, because you're essentially behind an existing flood wall there, and could excavate, build your wall, and then you just tie back in to the existing wall, or they're actually replacing the entire existing wall up at the top. So it seems like you're tying back in, and then you have what's essentially a facade in front of that wall. This just becomes your structural support for the bridge.
Mr. Chair, can I ask just a couple of quick questions? The current layout of Kimberly looks like there are no sidewalks up against the creek on the western edge of Kimberly. It starts a little ways up. There are cars parked right up against the edge of the creek. And Cameron, you were saying something about the possibility of eliminating the sidewalk along there in the way it's designed now, and having a sidewalk or a crosswalk etched in at some point further up the road. I personally don't understand why we'd want to get rid of the sidewalk or remove the ability for pedestrians to actually see the creek. If there's a benefit to that, I'd like to hear what that is. But personally, I think it's going to be a beautiful project in that area of the creek. It would be nice for people to be able to walk all the way to the corner and see the water.
The issue really is just putting concrete up in the top of the bank, and you eliminate area where you have a very tiny area to have any kind of riparian vegetation or trees that could provide some canopy over the creek. On this side, you've got a vertical wall with a structure right up to that literally hangs over the creek.
Mm-hmm.
And so in an effort to try to create space here for some of the vegetation,
So that's okay.
You're just taking 6 feet. You just have 6 additional feet to lay your bank back and be able to establish vegetation.
Okay. And one other thing on the sycamore, to go way back in the conversation, but on sycamore tree, we're talking about all this effort to preserve that tree. It's a beautiful large tree. It's already compromised though, and I do see the merit in trying to save a sycamore of that size and that age. But I think before we send Public Works back to redesign the project and push everything over and west, we get a very solid estimate from someone that's going to be working on or an engineering firm that's going to be working on the Lower Mission Creek project to figure out if it really is going to survive the construction. Instead of sending, again, staff back and doing all this work for something that is most likely not going to survive, I think we'd be better served, the community's better served if we look at it realistically with both projects in mind.
Well, nobody jumped on your park on the bridge or keep a sidewalk wide, so I'll jump on that for you and just remind the committee members that sometimes even something you build can be a wonderful project. And I walk over Bath and Haley once a week, and I see something new every time I do. So, and one of the benefits there is the wide sidewalks with an intersection, the inclusion of the art, the stampings, and the tile work, and I would encourage you guys all to continue to remember that as you move forward in this project, and try and find space for sidewalks that doesn't compromise the width and the site constraints, and give up a few cars if that's the necessity. Eventually, the La Entrada project is going to provide a parking lot over to the right there, a public parking lot. This area of town will transform in the next 10 years to a vibrant pedestrian area of town, And I hope that intersection with this bridge too will mirror or improve on the lessons and the accomplishments she learned at Bath and Haley. So.
And jumping on that also, I drive over that bridge many times a week, and I really like looking over and looking through the fence that's so people don't fall in, and being able to see the water as it rises and goes down, and the ducks and the herons. So if this is the right time to talk about the wall that's going to be put up, I'd really like to have one that you can see through rather than a solid one, because it's a great view.
I think that's what's being considered.
Mr. Chair, the bridge rail will likely go back to, we actually have given HLC some options to look at for the bridge rail, and we'll definitely be talking to them real soon, maybe even the next meeting regarding I don't think I have the bridge rail with me.
So I think what we're looking for to try to wrap up, and since Leanne French is not here, she can watch this discussion, because there is another HLC meeting coming up on January 4th.
Actually, it's 18th.
January 18th.
Okay. And I believe that's the same day as the next Creeks meeting. Is that correct?
Could be. I don't have the schedule in front of me. Third Wednesday. But we do have Mr. Moldaver, and he's our liaison, and so to try to be responsive to the request of Mr. Kelly, the city engineer, it would be great if the committee could let Mr. Moldaver know what you all would like to have represented at that meeting, and be as specific as possible with design requests.
Well, who's got ideas that we should tell Lee to forward onto the HLC?
Talk loud. I like the idea of relocating the pipeline because of the width and the slope. I think that'll make the project a little more environmentally valuable, and if you can put that slope back any farther. I'm just worried about future flood control issues where they're going to have to say that bank is too steep and needs hard bank protection, and I would try to minimize hard bank protection as much as possible in the long term. I loathe this stuff. The concrete walls should be eliminated and not continued. So anytime we can slope the banks back at a more stable slope, I think it's something to work for. So, and I agree with no parking on the bridge. I think that's a really important component. I mean, I don't know any bridges that really allow parking anyway, so. I think that's all I'll have.
Mr. Chair, should we see if anyone from the public wants to comment about anything they've seen or heard? Just for the record, to show we were asking. There's hundreds of people here. They've been very, very quiet.
All right. Are there any members that would like to say anything? No? Okay. Well.
A couple things I want to make sure that we get clarification on that were specifically requested, and that is the design of the habitat expansion zone area and this cross section. And is this I mean, again, we're in a conceptual design or preliminary design stage with the bridge. Does this type of design for the downstream habitat expansion zone area seem acceptable?
I think. Go ahead.
Are these rocks going to remain partially exposed? Or they're going to be covered with soil? Are they under the water level? Are these entrenched, embedded, or actually?
Let me just clarify. I'm George Thompson, Creeks Planner with the City of Santa Barbara. And I've assisted Public Works in developing this concept. And basically what the concept is that they would remain submerged throughout most of the season, so that this vegetation is basically emergent through the water surface.
I'm more concerned about hiding places for tidewater goby, because the gobies do go up that high.
Right.
So are they going to have little areas to hide in between the rocks, or are these going to be exposed? Or
Yep, these are going to be large sandstone boulders that are just set in place and exposed to the creek bed here. And then one other comment I should make is that at one time we were discussing with Public Works the possibility of a short wall up here so that this bank isn't as steep. But the drawback is that you lose less planting area. So obviously the ideas of planting pockets and things like that can come in at the final design stage. And obviously during construction we would monitor that those things happen, but that is kind of an alternative to this. I don't know if you want to make a recommendation on that, but that's kind of what we're thinking.
Well, I just don't want it to be an unstable slope, so
Definitely.
control comes in and justifies, or anybody comes in and justifies some sort of hard bank protection.
Yep.
So the more laid back it is, the more stable it will be. So that's my only concern. I mean, planting pockets are great. The whole point is to have shading. And I'd like to see also the tidewater goby somehow put into the equation, because they will travel this far upstream easily, and have been known to. So especially if there's high velocities, they need places to hide and not be washed out.
So I think we're all in agreement to maximize that downstream green area, yeah?
Okay, now as far as this type of design with the jog to try to increase the available habitat area here, and as an alternative that could potentially protect the sycamore tree. What are the thoughts?
I think anything that minimizes the width of the road visually, and I look at this Mason Street as it's almost like a country lane, and the surrounding neighborhood is a historical, older part of town, and just seeing the original plan of this just extreme width of street and sidewalk and concrete, anything to minimize that, I think would be more pleasing to the eye and would preserve the neighborhood.
And it seems to be in keeping with the Historical Society's desires also. So, if you give it a look and it seems feasible, then it seems like a good solution.
I think that's what we've got, right? I think that covers everything. So we've covered this downstream habitat area. We covered the bridge width. We covered the sycamore tree, and we've covered this area up here. With regard to the storm drain and a sloped bank.
How about one way on Kimberly?
Mr. Chair, in addressing the one-way in Kimberly, we've researched the one-way issue with regards to the Chapala-Yananali Street Bridge just upstream and to the north of this project site. And so we have evaluated one-way and two-way issues associated with that project and with regards to Mason. And so what staff is concerned about is that this bridge will be, once the new bridge is in place, it will be there for, I'm guessing, don't hold me to it, but I'm guessing over 100 years. because that's how long some of the bridges have lasted in the city, and to today's standards, it could easily last longer than 100 years. We've got a proposed development for a hotel on 16 West. We've got the California Hotel, which, as part of the Law and Charter project, is anticipated to be a development project. So this whole neighborhood will change over time. It's a matter, I believe, of when and how. And so while we have this very, very great environment now, I agree with Mr. Jordan's comments with regards to it will transition someday. And so we have to keep that in mind when we're thinking of the construction of a 100-year-old, 100-plus bridge that will be there for a very, very long time. And so with regards to the one-way, staff will we'll try and do our best to represent the city's best interests with regards to what is the appropriate minimum width of roadway that we would recommend for now and for the future. But the future, knowing what we know about proposed developments or anticipated developments, or the realization that someday, don't know when, the economy will turn around and there will be some other type of development that we're not even anticipating today. So staff is taking the position that the minimum pavement width will be 26 feet with regards to the minimum that will be necessary for the turning and sight distance requirements, the technical aspects of the roadway geometry. And so the one-way versus two-way, that again can be determined on another project. It's not part of this project. We're not proposing one-way for this project. What we are designing for is the appropriate width of the street for the future. And so I'm hanging my hat on this road with recommendation of 26 feet. So people can talk about one-way versus two-way, and there's a lot of pluses and minuses and issues associated with that. But what I'm talking about is what is the geometry of this bridge. As I mentioned previously, the westernly abutment of this bridge is the anchor to the geometry of the project. The determination of the width of Kimberly is another key element of the geometry of the project. If we can get support on those two elements, we can move forward with a project description. That's what's needed to move forward. If we need to have more discussions on those two elements, then I'd like to entertain that and have that healthy discussion with you. But that's my position on that one-way issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wasiak is always a compelling speaker based on his years of experience and commitment to the city. I had to work very hard to get these gray hairs and receding hairline, and I remember the same thoughts expressed about the inevitability of the development of Mora Mesa 30 years ago. I remember when Phil Demery, when he was County Public Works Director, took every dollar of mitigation money for the Camino Real Shopping Center and built that ridiculous southbound 101 merge lane between Glen Annie and Los Carneros because he was sure that Bishop Ranch development was right around the corner. Everyone was sure 10 years ago that Entrada and the new Miramar and the Children's Museum would already be built and gloriously helping our economy. And except for that fake thing to make Mr. Casey happy at Entrada, none of them have broken ground. And we really can't say for sure when you meet in your own secret meetings whether these projects will ever be built. But we know that the creek is here. We know that the habitat is here. We know that people come from all over the country and all over the world to enjoy that. We know that threatened and endangered species are here. We know that there's a move to try to restore the steelhead runs, so some vestige of what Teddy Roosevelt enjoyed 100 years ago will still survive in the next century. So I appreciate the idea that we need 26 feet of width to accommodate the future Children's Museum and the future Entrada, and maybe Veronica Meadows needs that space too. But I think that making permanent physical alterations to one of the city's most historical areas with this very sensitive habitat, based on the hope that someday something new and different will be there that needs more capacity. I think that's what engineers have to do. They think big, they think about tomorrow, and I think preservationists look at what we have now and how much we've lost, especially in coastal wetland and riparian areas, and how many of these big ambitious programs never even break ground. As you know, in the 1880s, it was a sure thing that the city of Naples was going to be just north of the Goleta Valley. And that was 130 years ago, and we're still waiting. So I understand as an engineer, is thinking big and thinking about the future, that's what you and Pat have to think about when you're talking to your partners in the community. But I think our purview is the creek and the water quality and the habitat, and we have to try to stand up for the vegetation and the critters and the trees and slope rather than wall wherever we can. And that's why the council created us to advise them. And so I hope that's what we continue to be able to do.
What street width accommodates a sidewalk on the west side of Kimberly but no parking on the west side of Kimberly?
Let's see. There is no parking proposed on Kimberly with the 26 feet at all. That is required for the turning movement, and that would be the narrowest width here. Where the project stops, the existing road width is about 32 feet. So we're talking about a transition of 26 feet to the existing road width. That's what the project description. So, I'm sorry. 26 feet here and then widen. It could transition out, either be 26 for a while and transition a little bit later, or it can transition throughout. We haven't been sold on the details yet, but again, back to your question of sidewalk. I'm sorry, what was the sidewalk component of that?
I thought I remembered earlier when Cameron was talking about the option of a crosswalk higher north on Kimberly, that there would not be a sidewalk farther down, but then someone on the committee expressed the desire to have a sidewalk. So I was wondering what street width would accommodate a sidewalk but no parking lane?
Okay, I think I got it. So what I was talking about was the pavement width from curb to curb is 26. So regarding the sidewalk, I believe it's proposed to be 6 feet. I believe it's a 6-foot sidewalk that is existing but terminates at this point currently. So this design reflects the continuation of the existing sidewalk across the bridge. And so the 26-foot is not dependent on the sidewalk at all. So it's a matter of what I believe Cameron was saying was that the vegetation could be expanded to the curb if there was no sidewalk. Okay.
So it looks like as designed right now, you have, I think if I heard John correctly, you've got 6 feet sidewalk, 26 feet of roadway. That looks the same. 6-foot parkway and 6-foot sidewalk.
And I
So.
would recommend that be less at this point. We would I would recommend. Thank you. Staff further evaluated this parkway issue, recognizing that I'm not sure the need of the parkway for a proposed commercial area. Fronting a proposed commercial area, typically we would have sidewalk and not parkway in front of a commercial area. And so that's the case at an adjacent property. So this distance from the curb to the back of walk is 9 feet. And I would recommend continuing that configuration through here so that we wouldn't have 12 foot of width here. We would narrow this to 9 feet and have tree wells, but not parkway. And then we would have an adequate sidewalk and parkway to current city standard, to current city practices and standards.
So it's a 41-foot width. I think if I have that right.
26. 6. And 6-inch curves.
Oh, okay. 42.
Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure. I know Mr. Wasiak wants to get home and spend some quality time with his family and get ready for tomorrow's workday. Is the need for the 26-foot turning radius to accommodate a 45-foot bus or I can't think of many current cars and SUVs, let alone future battery electrics, that would require 26 feet to make a right turn.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Moldaver, the 26 is determined based on a couple factors. One is a 30-foot long turning radius for the vehicle to be able to negotiate those turns and stay within their lanes. It could accommodate actually a 40-foot bus if it overlapped the center line. So we're still trying to make the design width as narrow as practical or reasonable. And then the second issue of the 26-foot here is the sight distance that's needed to the bridge barrier rail will come close to the intersection because, again, it's driven from the western abutment. And we need 55 feet, and the bridge barrier rail will terminate at this location, and we need to be able to have a sight distance clearance. And so those geometry factors and those engineering factors combine to give us that 26-foot. And when we relooked at this regarding the sidewalk width here from 12 feet, we can reduce that. We will recommend reducing that to an appropriate distance, again, based on the design criteria.
Thank you, John. Other
I didn't write any recommendation here. I was going to recap these so that because I was taking notes for you, Paul. But I didn't hear anything with regard to Kimberly. So let me just recap what I've got, and if there's something that you want to add regarding the sidewalks or the street at Kimberly, please go ahead and add that. The first thing was relocating the storm drain pipe outlet, and then I heard slope the bank here as much as possible. So I think that necessitates a removal of the abandoned pipe. And then sloping the bank here as much as possible to, I guess, as low as possible towards the bed, as that can be done. No parking on the bridge as a way to narrow the bridge width. The downstream habitat expansion zone cross-section design is okay, with a request to just consider the Tidewater Goby and the effects. I guess that would be the underwater portion of the design. Minimize the width of the bridge, and that includes considering this as a possible design as a way to preserve the sycamore tree and narrow the width of the bridge, and also to increase the potential habitat expansion zone area. That's what I had so far, except for I didn't have anything from the discussion of Kimberly.
Mr. Chair, I was wondering if Mr. Benson could get the color aerial photo of the general area. Yeah, I think it's that one. And it seems to me that the railroad station, which actually predates the sycamore tree, has entrance and egress to accommodate the Amtrak super coaches that are only about 65 yards away from Kimberly, which is proposed to be widened to accommodate 26-foot turning radius. And even assuming that Entrada one day gets built and the two hotels there are revitalized, it's not clear to me why bus approaches to their project or for the Children's Museum couldn't work out a deal with the railroad station and the staging area there to pick up and to drop off. And it was also my understanding that one of the conditions of Entrada was that there was going to be a public parking structure with part of the parking space reserved for customers and clients of the new development, and part of it as available for the members of the public. So it seems like there would be large bus access already in close proximity to Kimberly, and there would be surplus parking also less than 100 yards away. So I would still hope that the committee could support the HLC recommendation to narrow Kimberly and put it in as a one-way street, because I I understand your vision for the future and accommodating those turning radiuses, but I think the free market is good for innovating, and I think if the street is one way and narrower, I think we can find ways. We have other resources there for ingress and for parking and for loading and unloading that are in close proximity and are ADA compliant.
Thank you, Lee. Mr. Chair, I guess I'd like to understand if the committee is moving in that direction, if you consider that. I'd like to, the minimum of a one-way, I believe, is 20 feet. So we're talking about 6 feet. And 6 feet would not move. What the 6 feet would be 6. I'm sorry. Excuse me. 6 feet would be 6 feet less because the design is driven from the anchor west abutment, and we go 150 feet, and we have to have a radius here. The 6 feet we're talking about is the 6 feet less of the take of 16 West Mason. So I'm trying to understand what we're accomplishing by doing that, because it doesn't change the bridge.
Would it have any impact on that?
That's not before us today. So we've made some determinations for that project, and so what I would like the committee to focus in on it is what are your comments for this project, and I'm really appreciative of the comments so far, and I'm just trying to get my understanding of what we would be accomplishing with 6 feet for this bridge.
You're saying it wouldn't affect any habitat development on the west side of the street?
Not the road width. Because the road's on the east side. Right.
And that habitat would... So this habitat on the east side would not be influenced if it was a 20-foot street or 26-foot street?
If my memory is correct, and my understanding is correct, this curb line doesn't change if the road is 20 or 26 feet wide. So from this line to the west, I don't foresee any change due to the Kimberly road width.
So I think the recommendation would be that to minimize the amount of asphalt. What is needed, but if we can make it as less as possible, I think that's what you were already alluding to.
Okay, and that's as goes to the street and to the sidewalk areas. So minimize width of Kimberly Road and sidewalks on Kimberly.
Yeah. And have we given enough direction for regarding that tree?
Well, I think the direction is to consider a design possibility that allows for preservation of the tree.
Okay.
That's what I've got.
Okay.
And looking at the long term, whether it's going to be preserved.
Yeah, I
for
mean,
the
if it's
widening.
if
portion.
it's worth, if
That was
it's
a good
going to fall
point.
down next year, what's the point in spending all this money?
That was a good point.
Well, there is a consideration that there is one huge trunk surrounded by 5 other minor, well, maybe the big trunk goes, but then we still have 4 or 5 others that could continue to grow and flourish.
Yeah, and I'm sure that they'll have an expert that would make a determination on that. 'Cause, I mean, it would be nice to keep it, but if the experts think it's not going to last, then.
It survived other creek maintenance procedures and looks pretty healthy.
The proposed widening is all on the other side, so this is just a wall going in. So what I heard was a concern about, and I think this is reflected in the arborist report, of a concern during construction of protecting the tree.
Yeah, and
So
if when they
make
build that
that
flood wall that may or may not affect the tree, if the flood wall fails because of the tree, that property owner is going to be looking to the city for compensation. All right, so do we have a motion to forward our recommendations to the HLC?
I would move, Mr. Chair, that we summarize and approve the recommendations that the committee and our staff have put before us at today's notice public meeting, and forward them to the Historic Landmarks Commission and the Public Works staff. And I would also recommend, out of courtesy to Mr. McIntosh and Ms. French, who aren't able to be here but who have significant interest in the topic, that we send out a draft to them before it goes out to the other deliberative bodies, so that if they have some further input or suggestions or questions, they can feel, especially since Leanne is our liaison on the project, that they feel fully respected and involved.
I think that because we are in a notice public meeting, that the committee probably should move forward with its recommendations if there's a majority of people supporting those. Mr. McIntosh, I think, was here for almost the entire discussion. Ms. French can certainly review that information, and is obviously welcome, like anybody is, to attend an HLC meeting and express her position. So she is the liaison, but either she or you, Mr. Moldaver, will be speaking on the committee's behalf.
I think John knows that the secret Nielsen ratings are that this is one of the most exciting and watched government broadcasts in the Tri-County. So I imagine Leanne will be drawn to watch the rebroadcast to see what she's missed. But I was recommending that we forward the suggestions made by the committee and collected by the staff to Historic Landmarks Commission as our position for the January 18th meeting.
Anyone would like to second that?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Yeah. Well, thanks very much for coming in. So moving on, we have Dr. Jill Murray giving us an update on the water quality research. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, yeah, don't show my notes. Huh? Don't put my notes up there. Okay. Okay, good evening, committee. I'll try and make this as brief as possible since you have been working for quite a while. So the purpose of this presentation is to update the committee on our research and monitoring program and tell you how our situation has changed since the last presentation to the committee. The outline will follow the staff report really closely. We were last here in June. We presented an update on our FY11 research and monitoring, and we also presented the FY12 research and monitoring plan, which you concurred with the staff recommendation to implement. And let's see. part of that research and monitoring plan that we're working on is our source tracking and illicit discharge detection element. And right now, all of that effort is focused on completing our source tracking protocol development project, which is a state-funded grant. It's the Clean Beaches Initiative. It's a project we're working really closely with Dr. Patricia Holden and her research group at UCSB. And the reason why we're coming to the committee at this point is that we need to let you know that we, as our staff, really needs to focus on finishing that project. We've learned a lot of new information in the past year, and we just need to finish this and postpone some of the work that we had planned to do, some of the other work that we had planned to do. And this is an action item, so we're asking for you to concur with that recommendation. We've worked with Dr. Holden since 2004 to try to understand sources of contamination to our creeks and beaches, and specifically coming out of storm drains, and focusing on understanding indicator bacteria problems and beach warnings. And in the past, I've spent a lot more time on giving background about that indicator bacteria issue. I'm going to hold off on that here. When we come back and present our final report on the project, we'll go into that in much more detail. And we partnered with Dr. Holden to use the cutting-edge DNA-based methods to try and find whether there were markers for real issues of concern in the storm drains, such as human waste or untreated wastewater, untreated sewage getting into storm drains. And this was several years ago. We were surprised to find that we were finding some of these markers in storm drains, usually at low concentrations, sometimes quite consistently. And despite substantial expense and effort, most of which has been grant funded, we had a really hard time finding how that contamination was getting into the storm drain network. There are a lot of different potential sources, such as RV dumping, or in creeks, people just, using the creek or bank as a latrine. Also the possibility of leaking sewer lines, somehow getting wastewater into storm drains. And so the goal of this project was to test methods we knew how to find out whether the indicator bacteria were of human origin. How is it actually getting into the storm drain network? So for the past couple years, we've put together the source tracking tools. We've used techniques that have been commonly employed in the sanitary sewer pipes, such as cameraing the pipes, smoke testing, dye testing, but these haven't been used in storm drains much. We put those together with our sewage sniffing dogs, which you've already heard about, and some GIS modeling, and we're trying to get this information to a report that will be accessible for other communities. And we're really focusing on this particular project in the ideas of how sewage could be getting straight into the storm drain pipes through direct or indirect connections. And I'm not going to take the time to discuss that in detail. So far we've tested a lot of the methods. We've developed more advanced techniques for dye testing. We've found an approach that really works well by combining some GIS predictive modeling of where to look, where to target areas, dye testing in the storm drains, and using video cameraing of storm drains to go confirm when we suspect we might have a problem area. And we found 4 locations where sanitary sewer pipes with untreated wastewater are crossing above storm drains, and the sewer pipe is in the condition where it's allowing material to leak out, and the storm drains below are not designed to be watertight, and so the wastewater is leaking into the storm drain pipe. And we've talked about one of those when we presented the work from the sewage sniffing dogs. There was another one discussed in Creeks Division e-News that went out to you. And so 2 of those leaks were coming from private laterals that were in bad condition, and 2 of them were coming from sanitary sewer main lines. And it's really, it took us a long time to get to this point. It's really, it's a significant development, and it also relates to the advisory committee, because when we've proposed in the past end-of-pipe treatment systems or diversions, the Creeks Committee has always said, if they've said yes, well, also keep looking for the sources. And so it's really taken a long time to be able to do that and find them. Also interesting in the results so far is that we haven't had a correlation between our wastewater markers, the microbial and chemical markers, and the indicator bacteria levels. So we can't just go back to using indicator bacteria, which are cheap and easy to understand where we might be having the problems in the storm drains. And also during this time, we've had, in some of the beaches that are the outlets to the creeks where we've had problems, where we know we've found problems, we've had really excellent beach water quality and grade A during dry weather. So these problems don't also seem to relate to the existence of beach warnings. So the remaining work on the grant is to finish our report with what we have so far, get that to the state. We also need to complete GIS work, and we have a new hourly employee to conduct that. And then the biggest part remaining is to conduct the video cammering of the storm drains in all of the locations that we've identified as target potential locations where contamination might be getting in, and conduct some dye studies to support that. So now we're taking the tools and applying them to a larger area. And then we have the more technical grant reporting to complete as well. The monitoring that we'll get, well, first of all, we don't have to postpone as much as we thought we would because we've hired a water quality intern, Donovan Macaron, to help us complete our scheduled tasks. That's been really helpful. But we will be postponing some of our more open-ended questions that require more study design and development, and those are the eutrophication, slurry sealing, catch basin cleaning, and we're also going to develop some field kits for our enforcement officer to use. And we're also proposing to postpone our quarterly reporting and put everything from the year into our annual report. All of the work on the grant remaining, we still have grant funds to conduct that. So, and that pays for our GIS, the Josh Bader's GIS time as well. And that's it. I made it short for you. I'll take questions.
Mr. Chair, Dr. Murray, thank you for your presentation. I would move to concur with the staff recommendation on the changes to the work plan and the reporting period within the remaining grant funding.
Does anyone have any questions for the doctor? So then we have Lee's motion to approve the request. Do we have a second? All in favor, then say aye. Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fast. Do we have any public comment? Sorry. No. Cameron, do you have anything further? No? Well, then I would say that we should adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Have a great Christmas.